Thank you all for having me here today. My name is Sean Pitman. I don't know if you all know who I am, but my wife's Sigrid. More people probably know her. She's working with God's Closet. If you guys want to see a big event, go to the school tomorrow, and they'll have hundreds of people there getting clothes, helping not just the fire victims, but all the community who needs children's clothes in particular. So that's kind of neat. Even the Red Cross is going to be there, and several news programs, so that'll be interesting for that. For me, I'm just glad that I have this time after this really difficult week to kind of set it aside in my mind and talk to you about something that I've always been interested in since I was a little boy. And it's about creation, and specifically how you can believe the Bible as more credible than what you often hear from the news or from scientists that challenge the Bible and say it's just not true, especially when it comes to evolutionary thinking and ideas. So I was always interested in this, and this is kind of what I learned over the years, because I didn't learn it all in school. Going through the Adventist school system, I kind of had to figure a lot of it out on my own, specifically after I went through to the Army, because people would ask me in the Army, why are you a Christian, and how can you possibly be a Christian when you know that the Bible stories aren't true? And I didn't have a good answer for them at the time, and so I started researching this and then sharing it with my military friends who were shocked. They'd never heard anything like this stuff in their lives. And so they said, well, you have to put it on the internet. And so I put it on the internet and then started getting asked to talk about it at various places all over the place. And so this is a chance I have to share it with you, and hopefully you enjoy it. One of the biggest questions, for me anyway, as a pathologist and going through medical school and everything, is how can you be a Christian and be rational, be scientific in your thinking and still be a Christian? And so I was like, well, I think that if God exists, then he made scientific thinking and rational ability to think, and just like everything else. And so if he exists, then he's the one who made science itself. And so they have to work together, hand in hand. Otherwise, it just doesn't make any sense. So I think there's actually a science to miracles. So I'm going to share this a little bit with you of how I came to this conclusion. So basically, first of all, what is science? Well, science isn't very complicated. It's basically using the past to predict the future. Your knowledge of the past, you use it, you make predictions based on that of the future. And your predictions have to be falsifiable. In other words, you have to make a prediction in a way where you can be wrong. You can be proved wrong. And also, science is not limited in its ability to detect the existence of the miraculous. But even though sometimes you can detect the miraculous, but you still can't understand exactly how it's working. But you can still know that it's a miracle. And I kind of like, for us men, it's kind of like women, right? You know that women exist and you know that they're miraculous, but you don't always know how they work, right? So you can still figure it out. It's kind of like the scientist who's making all these formulas going along in this cartoon, and they get into the middle of the formula like, I don't know, a miracle happens here. He says, I think you should revise your step here a little bit, but I think sometimes you don't have to revise it. You don't have to know exactly how it's working to know that it's a miracle, that it is working. And so there's these philosophies of modern science, and they're known as methodological and philosophical naturalism. Methodological naturalism is where you just don't recognize miracles at all, that God is not in play, but God may exist. Philosophical naturalism is where you go a step further and you say God just doesn't exist. You're an atheist. And so here's some examples. Here's a very influential French scholar, Pierre-Simon de Laplace, and when he was asked by Napoleon why he didn't mention God in any of his writings, he replied to Napoleon, he says, because I had no need of that hypothesis, of the God hypothesis. So here's another British scientist, J.B.S. Haldane, and he wrote something interesting. He says, my practice as a scientist is atheistic. That is to say, when I set up an experiment, I assume that no God or angel or devil is going to interfere with its course. And this assumption has been justified by such success as I've achieved in my professional career, that I should therefore be intellectually dishonest if I were not also atheistic in the affairs of the world. And so William Praveen, he passed away a few years back, but he's a well-known professor of biological sciences at Cornell University. And he wrote, "Evolution is the greatest engine of atheism ever invented. Naturalistic evolution has clear consequences that Charles Darwin understood perfectly well." Charles Darwin, he paid lip service to the possibility of God existing, but basically he was an atheist in his thinking, primarily because his favorite daughter died of scarlet fever, and he couldn't get around that, and he kind of blamed God for that. And so he said a good God wouldn't let that happen, so he didn't like that, and so he thought that God just didn't exist. And so he says basically, if you accept naturalistic evolution, Darwinian evolution, no gods worth having exist. No life after death exists. No ultimate foundation for ethics exists. No ultimate meaning in life exists. And human free will is non-existent. And this is the implications. I mean, you have Christians who claim to be evolutionists, but I don't think they really think it through. For me, it was one way or the other. Either the Bible was right or God didn't exist. At least not a God worth having didn't exist. He went on to add, he says, in other words, religion is compatible with modern evolutionary biology and indeed all of modern science if religion is effectively indistinguishable from atheism. So it's kind of a stark contrast, and I think he's right. If you accept the naturalistic worldview, you basically wipe out a lot of what makes life worth living, at least from my perspective. So compare this for this perspective, this naturalistic perspective, philosophical naturalism, to what the Bible has to say, which is very different. The Bible, I mean, David doesn't mince any words. He doesn't pull any punches. He basically says, you're an idiot if you don't believe in God. He says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. You're an idiot if you don't believe in God. So what did David really know, right? He also wrote, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all of the earth. Their words to the end of the world. So what does he really know about creation or about the universe compared to modern science? Paul said the same thing in Romans. He says, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, his divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. Now we'll get into that in a little bit, but Peter said the same thing also. He says, above all, you must understand that in the last days scoffers will come, scoffing and following their own evil desires. They will say, where is his coming that he promised? Ever since our ancestors died, everything goes on as it has since the beginning of creation. But they deliberately forget that long ago, by God's word, the heavens came into being, and the earth was formed out of water and by water. So who's right? There's two very different claims going on here. Philosophical naturalists or the Bible, the writers of the Bible. And I like to look at it as turtles going all the way up or all the way down, because there's this little story about the world being built on the back of a turtle in Indian culture. And then this Indian lady was asked about this, and, well, what's the turtle standing on? And he says, well, you silly young man, that's turtles all the way down. And so I kind of like that. I was like, well, can we understand God? Can we understand the origin of God, how God works? No, right? If we could, then I would be God, right? But maybe I can understand a little bit about which direction the turtles are going. For example, can evolutionists or atheists, can they understand how something can come from nothing? How the universe can make itself out of nothingness? Can they really understand that? No, they can't understand it either. But we have these two conflicting ideas. Either God made it all, or it came from itself out of nothing, right? And so we can't understand either extreme, but maybe we can understand which way the turtles are going. in between. And so I'll show you a little bit about that to see if you can know which way the turtles are going, to decide if it's God or if everything came from nothing, because that's your two options. So to show you, illustrate this for you, I'll have a little quiz. Here's some crystals: salt crystal, pyrite crystal, snowflake. Can these things be produced naturally, by natural mechanisms, as far as you know? They can be, right? No problem. How about these? These are river rocks that you would find in a river. How many say that these things can be produced, are natural rocks? Some people. Well, they're actually fake rocks. These are designed to look like natural rocks. So it's possible to make things that look natural, but the other way around isn't so easy sometimes. For example, here's highly symmetrical polished granite cubes used in industry for measuring and weighing and things like that. They're highly precise. How many people believe this was produced or can be produced naturally? Or does this have to be designed? Nothing like this. If you saw a granite cube, let's say 3 feet square on the surface of Mars, our rover came up to one of these things, it would hit the front page of every newspaper in the world. Everybody would say, well, this is evidence of intelligent alien life, right? But why is that? How about this? Is this natural or designed? Natural? No, it's designed because it says planting a natural garden. See what I'm saying? So again, you can make things look natural, but the other way around doesn't work so well. How about this? Natural or design? You believe that, well, a hurricane came along and this shoved the seeds in the ground and everything grew like that, all by itself. No one believes that? No. How about this? Natural or design? Now, I could have stacked the sticks like that to look natural, right? I could have done that deliberately. But you wouldn't doubt me if I said, well, they just washed up on some beach like this either, would you? How about this, though? Clearly designed, right? I just like these horses. So no one would argue, not even Richard Dawkins or any atheist would argue with that. Natural, everybody would say, well, that probably looks pretty natural. How about that, though? Nobody would argue with you when you say, well, this is clearly designed. Nobody in their right mind would argue with you. Same with this. You're walking down the creek, and all of a sudden you come around the bend, and there's these stacked rocks like that. You say, well, maybe a flood came along and just left them like that. No one would believe you, right? Why not? Everybody knows that that is designed. That takes design and skill. Same with the pyramids. If you saw those on an alien planet, everybody would know some intelligent alien was there. Now, this doesn't even have to be high-level design. This is the first family portrait of my boy Wesley. The guy with the big head, that's me. And the little one flying over the top, that's his friend Gabriel Luca, who's flying. He got adopted into the family somehow. But everybody knows that this is designed, even though it's not like high-level design. You still know it's designed. There's different levels of design. This is why you can know which way the turtles are going. You can start with a low level of design and work your way on up and see which direction the turtles are going. This is how he got a little bit older. This is Bradley's family portrait, his first family portrait. I'm the one with the big hair. And this is another, as they get older, the design improves, right? At least we're holding hands now, right? Me and Sigrid are holding hands. This is Bradley's shark. Still can tell it's designed. I like the shark. This is Wesley's blue dog. And this is Picasso's dog. But I like Wesley's dog better. Picasso, but at least you can tell it's designed, right? Here's a soapbox car. Not everybody's definition of high-level design, but at least you can tell it's designed, right? And a Maserati. Well, it's just a different level of design. I might not be able to make something like this, but at least I know it's designed. You see what I'm saying? Here's a space shuttle. There's no way I could make this in 1,000 years by myself, right? But at least I know it's designed. Spaceships, let's say you came across an alien planet, you found a spaceship that can do something fantastic that you can't do, that you can't even understand. Let's say it can go backwards in time or something like that. You might not be able to understand it or make it or do anything like it, but at least you would know it's designed. And it would take a high-level intelligence to make this, right? So it's a different level of intelligence that would be required. So let's look at some practical things that people have problems with when telling design from not design. when you come to a mechanical system like this, it's gears and sprockets and things like that, you know it's designed. It's made out of metal, and it's clearly designed because they're interacting parts all having to work together at the same time to produce a particular function, right? Same thing with a watch, all kinds of gears, all making a common function, common goal. Now, how about this? Do you know what this is? This was just discovered a couple years ago. This is the first gears identified in nature. They're interlocking gears, just like regular gears. This is part of a little tiny nymph hopping insect, and it helps its legs coordinate their hopping motion to within 1 part in a millionth of a second. And because the thing hops so fast, it has to coordinate its back legs or else it would hop off in some weird way, right? So it has to interlock these gears in order to make it hop in the right direction. Same thing with, here's the knees of a weevil, and they have a bolt and a screw so that they don't have to use their energy when they decide to stop for a while. They can just lock their bolt and screw in place and sit there for a while without using energy. How do you explain that? What's the difference between that and a real bolt and screw that we would make? How do you tell the difference that this happens not to be designed, but the other one is? How do you know that? Here's a fungus that grows on cow manure, and it's called Pilobolus, and it's got a little cannonball on the end of it, and it shoots this cannonball at 180,000 times the force of gravity, and it shoots it at up to 2 meters, about 1 million times farther than its own size. And if you make that equivalent to like a rifle bullet that's like yay big, the rifle bullet would have to travel at 57,000 miles an hour to be equivalent to this thing getting launched off. And it's also sun sensitive, it's light sensitive, so it can point based on where the sun is, so it can launch in the proper trajectory. The pressure behind this thing has to be built up in the proper place. The little cannonball on the tip has to be in the proper place for it to shoot off properly. Here's it getting shot off. All these little parts to this thing have to be set up very precisely in order for it to work at all. How do you develop something like that with multiple parts working together at the same time, highly precise? How do you develop something like that gradually in order for it to have a selective advantage? It just doesn't make any sense. Anybody know what this is? This was discovered about 5 years ago. This is a fence post with barbed wire around it, right? It's got about 7 or 8 layers of barbed wire around this little thing in the middle. It happens to be a spider's egg cocoon in the middle, and the spider built a fence around its egg. Now, how do you do that slowly? Let's say you only put like 1 strand around your fence. Well, it's not going to help keep the other critters out from attacking your egg. So you have to build enough barbed wire around your egg to make it effective. So you have to do that all at the same time, or you can't just develop it gradually in order for it to work properly. This is something very interesting. It's called a pistol shrimp. And I got a little video about this. But it produces a shock wave with its pincher, kabam, and it fires it like a pistol, and it has a cavitation explosion in the water, and the power that it generates and the heat that it generates is hotter than the surface of the sun for a brief period, a moment of time. So here's a little video clip, I'll have to show you this, that's amazing of these pistol shrimp. So I'm going to use this mic for the video clip.
Far from being quiet, the ocean is filled with a cacophony of animal noise that can even disrupt the sonic transmissions of submarines. Most of the din is made by a surprisingly insignificant creature, the pistol shrimp. By snapping its claws, it can not only make communication sounds, but something far deadlier. These shrimps are its prey. It deals a knockout blow from a distance by using its claw as a sonic weapon. First, its claw is cocked like a pistol, then fired. The effect is literally stunning. As the claw snaps shut, it fires a blast of bubbles. Incredibly, as the bubbles collapse, they momentarily reach the temperature of the sun. This implosion causes a shock wave that stuns.
How do you do that slowly? It takes a lot of speed and force to generate a cavitation bubble. You can't just gradually close your claw and do that. You have to have a minimum requirement to do that, and it's very complicated to get that done. Either you can do it or you can't. And there's no way to evolve that something like that gradually, step by step. It has to be designed. Maybe, though, what I've just showed you, all these illustrations, maybe these are on the level of human design, or maybe an intelligent alien could have done this. But you don't have to have a god to explain something like this. Some alien intelligence could have set this up, right? So let me show you a few other things that's a lot harder to attribute to just a smart alien. Back in 1974, Brandon Carter from Cambridge University, as a physicist, started noticing that the universe itself, the fundamental qualities of the universe, were set up just right, like Goldilocks universe, in order for intelligence to exist in the universe like us. And there's these fine-tuned features of the universe. He only had 38 of them at the time. Now there's over 150 of them, even more than that now, almost 200 of them now. Fine-tuned features of the universe that are necessary to support complex life. And so how in the world did the universe become so fine-tuned? For example, everything in the universe is flying away from each other. All the stars, all the galaxies in the universe are flying away from each other at a very precise speed. Now, the speed has to be exactly precise, because if it's going too fast, the universe would expand too fast for stars to develop. If it's going too slow, everything would crunch back down on itself and go back into a singularity and wipe out the universe. So it has to expand at just the right speed. In fact, it's so precise, the expansion of the universe must be so precise, it must be precise to 1 part in 10 to the power of 123. And that's like picking the same grain of sand in the Sahara Desert, blindfolded, 5 times in a row. How are you going to get that right accidentally, right? And this is only one of the fine-tuned features of the universe. The proton, I'm sorry, I could go into lots of other ones. We don't have time today. The other problem here is that there's these things called antimatter, matter and antimatter. Every electron has an antitron that when they come back together, they would wipe each other out. So according to Big Bang, mainstream physics, quantum theory, when the universe was first created, it had to be, if it was just naturalistic, you had to have the same amount of matter as you have antimatter. The problem is that the universe that we have is only matter. There's no antimatter, or almost none. Otherwise, it would wipe itself out and go into pure energy. So why are we here? This is one of the biggest questions in naturalistic physics that there is today. Why are we here? Because we should have been wiped out by the antimatter that was made at the beginning. You have to do this by design in order to make only matter and not antimatter. If you do this by just random process, it's very unlikely that we would be here at all. And so this is the collider at CERN. And this is published in Nature fairly recently, 2016. The Alpha team was looking for some discrepancy between matter and antimatter, but they're identical, and they've determined the similarities, or the identicalness of matter and antimatter, down to 2 parts in 10 billion, which they published in Nature. This is a huge problem for physics, because it means that the universe cannot be explained, the origin of the universe. And so here's Jeffrey Haxt. He's the spokesperson for this team. And he said, we shouldn't be here. That's the conclusion of physics. There should just be energy. There should just be some light. And no one can explain to you why there's matter and not antimatter in the universe. So why are we here outside of deliberate design? So some physicists are actually starting to recognize this, or actually being honest with this. Here's Arno Penzias. He's a Nobel Prize winner in astronomy and physics. He says, astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created of nothing and delicately balanced to provide exactly the conditions required to support life. In the absence of an absurdly improbable accident, the observations of modern science seem to suggest an underlying, one might say, a supernatural plan. Sir Roger Penrose, British mathematical physicist, he says this extremely high level of fine-tuning astronomers and physicists discern powerfully suggests purpose behind the universe. So how in the world can you be an atheist? Even Einstein recognized it, and begrudgingly in some way. He said, the most incomprehensible thing about the world is that it is comprehensible. I mean, if the universe just randomly came into being, why is it based on such a language of mathematics that we can actually study it and understand it? It didn't have to be written like this. It's like a setup job that we can even study the universe and figure out what's going on. And for Einstein, this really troubled him. Why is the universe set up so well so that we can study it and understand it? Why is it written so nicely and so beautifully in the way it's programmed for us to exist? Well, the Bible says, well, the thing about it is, if you look carefully enough at the handiwork of God, and you at least have an open mind, and you seek God, you will find God if you seek Him with all your heart. If you really want to know the truth, the answers are there. God will give it to you. But it's a matter of, not so much a matter of evidence, it's a matter of your heart condition, whether you want to know or not. And I'll get into this in a minute, but it's very interesting. So what are the best counter-arguments from the popular atheists, the young atheists lately? Well, the argument is that something came from nothing. They believe it's turtles all the way up, that it started at zero and just a turtle popped into existence from nothing. And so you don't believe me, but this is exactly what they're saying. Stephen Hawking, who recently passed away, he is proposing this, what's called M theory. The M doesn't really stand for anything. It could stand for anything like mother or magic or whatever. But in his book, The Grand Design, published in 2010, he says, because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing, why the universe exists, why we exist. It is not necessary to invoke God to light the blue torch paper and set the universe going. In other words, it made itself from nothing. Right? This is what he's saying. According to M theory, ours is not the only universe. Instead, M theory predicts that there are a great many universes created out of nothing. Their creation does not require the intervention of some supernatural being or God. Rather, these multiple universes arise naturally from physical law. So if you're arising from physical law, are you arising from nothing? No. What he believes is that there's this computer out there, a quantum computer, universal quantum computer. And there's this big lake bubbling in the background. And out of this lake, which is already there, the quantum computer background, bubbles pop into existence out of the lake, bubbles. And each bubble is a universe. And this lake is bubbling along, making infinite numbers of universes. And ours just happened to turn out right. Well, this is a problem because it undermines the basis of science and rational thought itself. However, Dawkins was very excited by this. Richard Dawkins is a famous evolutionary biologist. He says, Darwinism kicked God out of biology, but physics remained more uncertain. Hawking is now administering the coup de grace, kicking God out of physics. However, here comes Sir Roger Penrose again, and he says, unlike quantum mechanics, M theory enjoys no observational support whatsoever. In other words, it's not based on science or evidence. It's based on philosophy, your personal philosophy, based on just mathematical imaginings of the physicists and mathematicians. So it's really not science. Again, this boils down to your personal philosophy of what you want to be true. Lawrence Krauss, he's an American theoretical physicist and cosmologist. He also wrote a book in 2012, and it's called A Universe from Nothing. which is interesting as well. This has got Dawkins all excited again. He said, even if the last remaining trump card of the theologian remains, why is there something rather than nothing, it shrivels up before your eyes as you read these pages of Krauss's book. If on the origin of the species was biology's deadliest blow to supernaturalism, we may come to see a universe from nothing as an equivalent from cosmology, kicking God out of everything, right? So how do physicists actually believe this stuff? Well, here's one of my favorite physicists, and he's explaining why he believes it. Sometimes even your most intelligent favorite guys can get stuff silly wrong. But I'm just showing this to you so you understand what people are actually saying.
And so the universe could essentially be nothingness, which was unstable, and created a soap bubble. Now you may say to yourself, well, that can't be right, because that violates the conservation of matter and energy. How can you create a universe from nothing? Well, if you calculate the total matter of the universe, it is positive. If you calculate the total energy of the universe, it is negative because of gravity. Gravity has negative energy. When you add the two together, what do you get? 0. So it takes no energy to create a universe. Universes are for free. A universe is a free lunch. And then you may say to yourself, well, that can't be right, because positive and negative charges don't cancel out. Therefore, how can the universe be made out of nothing? Well, if you calculate the total amount of positive charge in the universe and calculate the total amount of negative charge in the universe, and you add it up, what do you get? 0. The universe has 0 charge. Well, what about spin? Galaxies spin, right? But they spin in all directions. If you add up all the spins of the galaxies, what do you get? 0. So in other words, the universe has 0 spin, 0 charge, and 0 matter energy content. In other words, the universe is for free.
So no problem. Making something from nothing, everything adds up to 0. Right? So this is why they believe what they believe. The problem is, again, Roger Penrose, he's a really sharp guy. When you start the universe, there's this problem called entropy, the order of the universe. It's like a battery. How do you get a fan blade to rotate? How do you get your car to run? You have to have order to begin with. Well, the order of the universe had to be extremely precisely fine-tuned and balanced. How do you get that in an order of the universe? The order of the universe had to be precise. I can't even think of a number like this. It's 1 and 10 to the 10 to the power of 123. In other words, there's 10 to the 80th atoms in the visible atoms, tiny atoms in the visible universe, 10 to the 80th. If you took and wrote down this number, 1 part and 10 to the 10 to the 123, and you wrote it down, you would have to put 10 to the 40th zeros on every atom in the universe just to write down the number. See what I'm saying? It's extremely highly fine-tuned. How do you explain the origin of the fine-tuned feature of the universe, the initial precision of the universe, so that we could be here now and function? How that the sun could shine, that anything could work whatsoever. How do you get that to work? Well, no one can explain that. The origin of the universe had to be extremely precise. And the free lunch thing doesn't work because you can't just order this stuff for free. This is why they come up with the multiple universe idea, where you have millions and millions of universes or infinite numbers of universes to explain this statistical problem. And this is an illustration of the statistics of this problem. It's a little video clip. You see a little tile fall into place, right? Now, let me tell you, the problem with this number, the statistical number, is that if every tornado in the history of the world had created houses instead of tearing them down, that would get you close to the precision you would need to set up our universe properly, right? How does that happen without design? Do you believe that this could actually happen without design? Nobody believes that. And yet physicists are saying the same thing. This can happen without design. How do they get to that point in their thinking? It's because of philosophy. It's because they have to get something from nothing. Here's a little video clip of Richard Dawkins talking about this problem for physics and for biology as well.
I'm not so at ease with that as you seem to be, because
I can't hear the audio.
it does seem to me that
Can you start the audio again?
I'm not so at ease with that as you seem
Can
to
you hear
be,
it?
because
No.
it does seem to me that
All right, try again.
I'm not so at ease with that as you seem to be, because it does seem to me that if there is a supernatural, superhuman intelligence that worked it all out, in a way that undermines the entire scientific enterprise, because we are, maybe an evolutionary biologist feels this more strongly, the whole enterprise of evolutionary biology is to explain how you get prodigious complexity and design from virtually nothing. I mean, we hand over to physicists when we can go beyond the virtually nothing to the absolutely nothing.
So he says the whole enterprise of biology and of science itself is to explain how to get something from nothing, right? And without that, you have to accept that God exists. So here's a little, he goes on to explain this a little more.
If the deistic God thought all that through and set up the laws of physics, then he would have to be damn clever. He would have to be the physicist to end all physicists. I don't care if he then withdraws. He needs an explanation in his own right. And it seems to me that the noble scientific enterprise is to start from as near nothing as you can get. Yeah.
So the noble scientific enterprise is basically to explain away God. Otherwise, you're stuck. But Dawkins himself will recognize intelligent design for coming from aliens or anybody else, as long as you don't call it God. Why not? Well, here's the philosophy behind it. Lawrence Krauss, the same guy who wrote The Universe from Nothing, he did an interview with this radio host, and this is a discussion that they had. It's very interesting. Every now and then they forget themselves and they become honest for a little bit. All right? So he's asked this question: do you see any evidence of purpose in the universe? And Krauss wrote, or responded on the radio program, well, maybe I would believe if the stars all lined up and spelled out a message from God. Like, the stars all come together and they say, hey, Lawrence, this is God just stopping by to say hi, right? Then I would believe, right? That's what he's saying. Well, Bradley said, no, actually no. That wouldn't be evidence for God on your multi-universe view, because all you'd have to say is, well, we're just in the right universe where all the stars lined up and spelled out a message that seemed to be from God, right? The statistical odds are basically anything that can happen and will happen. So he says, if there is an infinite number of universes existing for an infinite amount of time, then anything can happen no matter how unlikely it is. Therefore, no evidence could convince you that God exists, since the observable, untestable, eternal multiverse can make anything it wants. So how is he going to respond to this question? In other words, you can explain two-headed cows, 10-headed cows. Nothing should be surprising. Angels dancing on the head of a pin. Arnold Schwarzenegger winning the California lottery 10 times in a row, right? Well, he was just in the right universe, right? Doesn't have to be designed, right? It basically undermines the basis of science itself. You can't know anything based on this multi-universe idea that physicists are trying to float. So how is Krauss going to respond? It's fascinating to me. He said, that's a true statement. At least he admitted that the guy said what he said was true. So how does he explain it away? He says, you talk about this God of love and everything else, but somehow if you don't believe in him, you don't get any of the benefits. So you have to believe. And then if you do anything wrong, you're going to be judged for it. I don't want to be judged by God, and that's the bottom line, right? It doesn't boil down to physics or evidence or anything. It boils down to the idea that he doesn't want to be judged by God. That way, and it's for that reason only that God cannot exist. And by the way, just last month, Lawrence Krauss was removed from his position at his university for sexual abuse. Right? Just last month. And so it's in a court battle right now, a court case, but he was removed from all his positions because, again, he wants to be free to do what he wants to do. All right? So this is very interesting. So here's a little video clip from Ben Stein's interview with Glenn Beck talking about the reason for this.
They are so closed-minded, yes. and it really, I got the feeling from the movie that it's really not about science.
No, it's about them.
It's anti-God. They cannot allow God to be a part of anything.
Right, because if there's a God, then they might be judged. If there's a God who holds you accountable for your actions, you're in a lot of trouble. Now, I'm going to be the first to agree, I'm in a lot of trouble too. But there's a lot, but they cannot admit that there's a possibility of sin or a possibility of morality. And they can't agree on this basic thing. If man is just a speck of dust struck by lightning and then turned into a human being, then he has no moral responsibility. If we're all children of God, we have some moral responsibility because we all have some little piece of God in us. Yeah. That scares them to death. Okay.
Yeah, so if we have a little bit of spark of God within us, we're made in God's image, right? So we have a little bit of moral responsibility too. Well, these guys don't want that. And it's not about evidence or science or anything like that. Again, it's about their desire to avoid the reality of God in order to avoid judgment. Now, from a Christian's perspective, you know, I'm in the same boat. I'm not a good person either. I'm going to be judged just like everybody else. But the advantage of a Christian is that God has gone to judgment for me. And judgment is going to therefore be given in favor of the saints. Now, what does it mean to be a saint? It's like David. Was David a saint? Yes, he's a friend of God. And yet he did some pretty wormy things, right? And so that gives me hope, right? Maybe I could be a friend of God too. If David could be a friend of God, maybe I can be a friend of God too. And so this gives hope to the Christian, even though we're in the same boat. And so for me, it's all about hope. And just another little clip.
Hello, I'm Creation.
And I am the theory of evolution. Why are you so happy?
Oh, are you kidding? Because I have hope.
Hope?
Mm-hmm. You know, and the assurance that I have a purpose.
A purpose?
Mm-hmm. You can have one too, you know.
Don't want one.
What are you talking about? Everybody wants to have a purpose.
That's not true. Some people want to hold to the unproven fact that we're nothing more than a bunch of protoplasmic goo that evolved over billions of years and will end up as cosmic garbage, therefore serving no one or no purpose at all.
No hope or purpose?
Right.
That's so sad.
I mean, which way do you want to go? You have these two options, and you can actually choose. But it's not about science. It's about having a desire for what is truth to discover that in your life. And so I'm kind of out of time here, but I can end now. These are kind of like a combination of ideas, but unless I wouldn't feel bad at all if you guys have other plans to go. But these are just some of the other cool little things, like little gadgets inside of you in biology. We've talked about the universe, and this is a little bit about biology. So if you're interested, I'll keep going if you want. If you want to keep going. So as fantastic as the universe is, and as finely tuned and as magnificent and obviously designed by God, the simplest living thing is way more complex than the entire universe as far as informational content is concerned. And if you've ever seen a baby born, I delivered 77 babies myself. And if you've ever seen a baby born and you study embryology, you're going to get an inkling of how magnificent it is, a living system, and what's all involved with that. And David said we're fearfully and wonderfully made, but he didn't know the first of it. We've learned so much about how living things work and how they function. The more you study it, the more magnificent it becomes. I mean, Dawkins says that, oh, well, yes, it's magnificent and it's miraculous, but all you have to do is go on the backside of the mountain and you have a nice smooth slope up to the top of Mount Improbable. That's like, but statistically, if you actually look at it, and this is what convinced me and my military friends when I shared it with them, is that if you go on the backside of the mountain, it really isn't smooth. You try to take a step, and you can take the first couple steps pretty well, but as you go more and more steps, each step gets exponentially higher than the step before. And so it takes longer, exponentially more and more amounts of time to get up to the next step of functional complexity using just random chance, random mutations, and natural selection. Because it's based on a code, an informational code, and all informational systems, all language systems use the same type of code. It doesn't matter if you're talking about zeros and ones in computers, or if you're talking about the 4 letters of DNA, A, T, C, and G, or the English language of 26 letters, they all work in the same way. For example, here's a Scrabble board. No one would doubt me if I just said, I threw out these letters on the Scrabble board and they just landed like that, right? No one would have any problem with that. However, you might have some problems now. It's like, well, if I just threw them out, maybe if I threw them out a few thousand times, they just landed like that and spelled out a few words by random chance. But how about now? No one believe me if I threw that, even 1 trillion times. It's not going to work, right? The reason why you naturally have an inherent sense that this is not right, that you don't believe me, is because you understand something about what's called sequence space, or statistical odds of sequence space. Sequence space is a space that holds every possible permutation of a word or a series of letters of a given length. For example, if you have 2-letter words, the total number of possible 2-letter words in the English language is 26 to the power of 2. And if you go 7-letter words, it's the other way around, actually, 7 to the power of 26. So then you look at the ratio of defined words or meaningful words versus meaningless words. And the ratio doesn't just double or increase in a linear manner. It increases, or it actually decreases in an exponential manner. So that it gets exponentially harder and harder to evolve longer and longer words that are actually meaningful or beneficial. It's like stepping stones on a creek. The stepping stones close to the bank are easy to hop across because they're close together. But as you go farther and farther out, they get exponentially farther and farther apart. And it takes longer and longer amounts of time to find them. And so that's why biological systems just can't evolve beyond very low levels of functional complexity, even in trillions of years of time. And so when you talk about systems that require multiple parts all working together at the same time, this one particular here is designed by MIT students. It's a molecular machine or a molecular motor. But how about something, and that one too is also designed, but how about something like this? This is a machine that's inside of every cell in your body. It makes ATP, the energy system of your cell, and it's very complex, multiple parts working at the same time, gears and pumps, hydrogen pumps, all working together. How is that explained? Because you have to have it all there at the same time for it to work at all, not even a little bit. Here's another system where you create or copy DNA, make a transcript, and make it into RNA, the workable part of your cell. So here's a little video clip of it going in real time. This machine is multiple parts, dozens of parts. It goes along and copies the DNA and makes it into a working copy called RNA. All those parts have to be there at the same time or it just won't work at all, not even a little bit. It's the same thing when you make proteins. If you make proteins, you have to have another machine that brings in the parts one by one, adds the amino acids together one by one to make the protein. And all those parts have to be exactly right for this machine to work. And here's a little video clip to show you what I'm talking about. Maybe.
Inside the ribosome, the RNA is pulled through like a tape. The code for each amino acid is read off, 3 letters at a time, and matched to 3 corresponding letters on the transfer molecules. When the right transfer molecule plugs in, the amino acid it carries is added to the growing protein chain. Again, you are watching this in real time. And after a few seconds, the assembled protein starts to emerge from the ribosome. Ribosomes can make any kind of protein. It just depends what genetic message you feed in on the RNA.
And that's in every cell in your body all the time, every moment of every day that's going on. If you don't have that just right, you're not going to live. Here's a bacterial flagellum. It has a motor. It has a stator, rotor, just like an outboard motor on your boat. And all those parts, about 40 different parts, have to be there at the same time for this thing to swim in to any direction or beneficial direction. It spins at 100,000 rotations per minute, and it can stop in a quarter turn and spin the other direction so that it can change direction. Super high forces involved there, and all those parts have to be there just right at the same time. And here's a diagram of these parts working together. They're just amazing how this thing works. Here's the hairs in your ear that help you hear sound. They're like a choir. The short ones are in the front and the tall ones are in the back, and there's a rope attached to the heads of the tall one to the next one in the front, and the next one in the front. There's a rope. So then as the fluid gets pushed by the vibration on your eardrum, the tall ones get pushed back even by the size of a diameter of an atom. They get pushed back a little bit, and the rope tugs on the head of the shorter one in the front and opens up a calcium channel in the head of the shorter one and allows a signal to go through and sends the signal to your brain, and that's how you hear. All those parts, there's dozens of parts here, they have to be all set up just right in order for this system to work. Any of those parts are missing, you just don't hear. Not just a little bit, and you don't hear at all. And so here's diagrams of all these parts that have to be there for you to hear. So does anybody figure this out? James Tour, he's a synthetic biochemist, one of the best in the world. And he makes tiny little machines, nanomachines, tiny little cars and things like that. Micro machines that hopefully will be helpful in medicine someday. And he says, look, let me tell you what goes on in the back rooms of science with National Academy members, with Nobel Prize winners. I've sat with them, and when I get them alone, not in public, because it's a scary thing if you say what I just said, I say, do you understand all of this, where all this came from and how it happens? So just to show you what he does, these are some of the molecular cars he makes. There's a Tour de France, but with micro machines, and it's happened on a centimeter of gold, a gold plate that's only a centimeter square, and it's equivalent to traveling around the world like 5 times, how small these machines are. And they see whose cars can go the fastest on this tiny little gold plate. These are the things that he makes, all kinds of different ones to see which one works the best. And not just cars, these are just for fun, but he does a lot of other little things like this. He says, how do you do this without design involved? It takes a great deal of effort to make these things and a great deal of design. He says, every time I've sat with these people who are synthetic chemists who understand this, they go, no. We don't understand how these things could just come to be by themselves. These people are just so far off on how to believe this stuff just came together. I've sat with the National Academy members with Nobel Prize winners. Sometimes I will say, do you understand this? And if they're afraid to say yes, they say nothing. They just stare at me because they sincerely can't do it. It has to be designed, is what he's saying. And he's one of the foremost synthetic biochemists in the world. So again, life is way more complicated than even the universe. I just like that picture. That you can hold it in your hand like that, and it's just magnificent. Here you are in the Milky Way, tiny little speck in the universe. There's now more like 10 trillion galaxies that have been discovered. I have to update this slide. Out of 20 or 10 trillion galaxies, you're just in one of them in that tiny little speck there. Fine-tuned to at least 1 part in 10 to the 500, and even way beyond that if you count the entropy of the Big Bang. And DNA and the simplest living cell is way more complicated than that. So, and it's just based on 4 letters, like zeros and ones, except it's 4 letters instead of 2. And so here's a little video clip. I'll just talk you way through it about some of the magnificent molecular machines inside of you. So here's a mitochondria. It's crawling along a tubule to the right place inside of your cell, every one of your cells, to give the energy in the right spot where it needs to be inside of your cells. Here's a little pore through which the proteins get processed in the endoplasmic reticulum. This is energy machine for your cell that makes the ATP for your cell, that provides the energy along the mitochondrial surface as it crawls along to the right place where it needs to deliver the energy inside of your cell. It's like a giant factory, each one of your cells inside of your body. And this factory has a lot of little machines that keep it going. Here's another machine that copies your DNA into 2 strands. It's got arms, and it's got a little spinning motor in the front that spins as fast as a jet engine to copy the DNA and reach these arms in the right spot. All of these parts have to be together at the same time working properly, otherwise you can't copy your DNA and you'll die. And the DNA has to be packaged around these little balls called histones. If you don't have those little packaging devices, well, your DNA just won't work properly. And they get packaged and packaged and packaged until they turn into what are called chromosomes. And then we're flying out through the nuclear pore into the surrounding cytoplasm of the cell. Along the surface, as the cell divides, it has to line up properly with other tubules that come from centromeres on both sides of the cell. And these tubules have to attach to the proper place in the center of the chromosomes. If they don't attach properly, the cell won't divide properly and it will die. Both sides of the cell will die. And this extremely complicated mechanism that involves these robots. These robots send signals from the binding of the tubules to the spot on the chromosome, the centromere, on the chromosome, and it says, okay, everything's set up properly, you can start dividing now. And then these little robots start walking down these microtubules to send their messages. If the robots aren't set up properly, again, division will not occur properly and the cell will die. And here they are walking along, delivering their message. This is happening in every cell of your body, all the time. And here's a little white blood cell. The signal on the surfaces of the protein for the cell and the endothelium of the vessel, they send signals to each other telling the white cell where to go. Here's the proteins floating along the surface, the outer surface of the cell, the signaling proteins. Well, how do you get those signaling proteins there? Well, you fly inside the middle of the cell and take a look at it, flying through the skeleton of the cell that's made out of protein fibers. Well, these fibers are formed, but let's say they get too long. How do you know how to properly form the fibers? Well, other proteins that are made come along and they trim them to the proper length that they need to be and cap them off, just like that. Right? If those capping proteins aren't there, those trimming proteins, it wouldn't work. Here's the microtubules that form on one end, get degraded on the other end so that the cell can move and crawl along. Here's another little machine that walks along with 2 feet. It's like a little truck, and it hauls along these vesicles with proteins in them to be modified from one part of the cell to the other part. That's the centriole that has the microtubules coming. It has its own DNA. It's very complicated to know how to divide the cell. Here's the pores on the surface of the nucleus. The messenger RNA gets shot out through those pores and it gets wrapped into a circle, and then it's decoded by other pre-made proteins that then decode the messenger RNA to make other proteins, including themselves. It's like which came first, the chicken or the egg. And those proteins are packaged in these little vesicles, and they're transported by these little 2 feet to the Golgi apparatus where it gets modified into a functional state. Before it's modified, the protein is not functional. So it's modified in the Golgi apparatus, and then it's exported on the other side to the surface of the cell, where then the signaling proteins are deposited, and then it tells the white blood cell, hey, this is where you need to be, come on, slip through here and fight the foreign invader. And so that's how it works. You're like, wow, that's amazing. Of course, then there's other amazing machines. Here's the male gamete, the sperm. It's like a little missile, and it's got a bunch of levels and layers on it to protect the DNA that it's carrying. It's also got this little energy apparatus that I can't get into, but when it fertilizes the egg, then the egg starts to divide, and the egg divides and divides and divides until it makes a sphere. In the middle of the sphere, it's hollow, and there's these other types of cells in the middle that form a plate, like a sheet of paper in the middle of the sphere. And then the sheet of paper gets a line drawn down the middle of it, and then around this line, the paper starts to fold. It folds like an origami project, like you're folding a sheet of paper into some little paper creature. And this is exactly what the cells start to do. They start to fold and fold and fold until they start to make arms and legs and eyes and heads and things like that that start to come out as they're folded and folded and folded and folded until eventually out comes a baby. And it's just, any of that folding goes wrong and it all goes spades on you. Doesn't work, and it's extremely complicated. That's just amazing level of design, and it's very hard to explain how that could just happen by itself, how it could evolve, even given infinite amounts of time. Also, the Bible itself, it describes scientific experiments. The Bible is not, doesn't stay away from science or describing science. It uses testable hypotheses all the time. One of them that's pretty interesting for me, at least, is that this is one of the testable promises in the Bible, saying if you breathe your tithe and offerings to God, God will bless you even if you don't do anything else right in your life. If you breathe your tithes and offerings, no strings attached, God is going to bless you. Open the windows of heaven. And you can test this out, see, like a scientific experiment in your life, and see if you don't notice a difference. I've done it, and you have to try it out for yourself too and see if it works for you. Same thing happened with the Ark of the Covenant that the Philistines captured, and everything started going wrong. They decided to do a scientific test to see if it was random chance. And it uses the word chance in the Bible and say, well, let's see if this happened to us by chance. And so let's put the Ark of the Covenant on this cart pulled by cows that have just given birth to calves. And what's a natural thing to do for a cow that's just given birth to a calf? To stay with the calf, right? So they said, well, if it does the unnatural things and goes off to Israel, taking the cart with it, then we'll know that this happened to us by God and not by natural chance. So this is a scientific experiment. And sure enough, the cows took off toward Beth Shemesh all by themselves, even though they complained the whole time, leaving their calves behind. So they knew it was a scientific test for divine interaction. So you have to do these tests too. And even the Bible challenges you to do it, to taste and see, test God and see that He is good. You have to test Him in your own life yourself personally to set up a scientific test to see if God is saying what He's saying is actually true for you individually. There's different miracles I could go into in my own life, just a couple quick ones. This one is kind of interesting. A few months ago, this last early spring, like February, early March, we were in Lassen National Park walking along, and there's this creek up there that we were walking along in the middle of nowhere. Then we went off to see this waterfall, and we walked for about an hour, and off the trail, all over the place, through meadows and stuff. And after about an hour, Wesley came up to me and said, I lost my pocket knife. And it's getting a little later in the evening toward dusk. I was like, well, that's the end of that, right? No more pocket knife for you. And so then as we were walking back, Sigurd says, maybe we should pray about Wesley's pocket knife because it might be a nice teaching illustration. I was like, well, it could also backfire too, And she's like, well, I think we should do it anyway. And so we all got together and we prayed for Wesley's pocket knife. We were in the middle of nowhere, not even on a trail. And after she said a short prayer, dear God, this would be just kind of a nice thing. If you could see yourself clear to do this, this would be a nice thing to show the kids that you care about little things, right? And she said, if you'd help us out, find Wesley's pocket knife, that would be great. Then she said, amen. We opened our eyes. And then she looked down, and the pocket knife is right there on the ground in front of her. So she picks it up, hands it to me. I'm in shock, right? And so you have to taste and see that God is good. And as magnificent as that was to me, my boy Wesley, when he was 5 years old, he was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which is a severe autoimmune disorder where you attack yourself with your immune system, and it attacked his intestines and his muscles. He got painful nodules under his skin, and his eyes flared up, and he was bleeding. His hemoglobin was half normal, and he could barely walk a few hundred feet without taking a break. And so his colon looked like hamburger. These are all ulcers in his colon, and he was bleeding from these. So this was pretty bad. We had to go down to UC Davis. So I got it was really a stressful time. So I brought together the church elders and the pastor, and we anointed Wesley at our house. And, after we said amen, Wesley was not healed. He still had the Crohn's disease. We still had to go to UC Davis. And so it's like, what are we going to do? And so while I was there, I read thousands of pages on Crohn's disease and what causes it, how to work with it. And during this time, a friend of mine who's a dermatologist, he came to me and he said, hey, Sean, have you thought about vitamin D? Because I've given vitamin D to some of my autoimmune patients who had skin disorders like epidermolysis bullosa, where they get blistering and things like that, and it went away. And I thought, well, he's just nuts, right? This is crazy. But he is a dermatologist, so I decided to read up on it. And so when I read about it, it turns out a few months before they'd done published a study on this, the vitamin D in Crohn's disease and how it really helped. And then when I was down reading at UC Davis, I read some papers that had just been published a couple months before on going on a liquid-only diet for 12 weeks. And it had never been done with a child before, and nobody knew how it worked, but it worked better than steroids for adults. And so I was like, well, why don't we try this with Wesley? So I asked his Crohn's specialist, pediatric Crohn's specialist, who's the best in the world, and he says it's not going to work. It's never been done before, not going to work. And I says, well, let's try it anyway. He says, well, you can try it, but you'll be back in a couple weeks, and then we'll have to go on these heavy-duty medications that wipe out your immune system. And since I'm a pathologist, I know that these medications have side effects. And one of the side effects is that you can get lymphoma that's lethal. There's nothing you can do about it, and it's 1 chance in 40,000, which doesn't seem very high until it's your own kid. And it's like, well, if I can avoid it, I want to avoid that. And so we tried it, and for the first day, it's chocolate milk, right? Pediasure, chocolate milk. Great, I can drink chocolate milk all day long, right? So we did fine the first day, and then the second day, he says, I'm not going to do it. He refused to do it. So I sat with him for about an hour, explaining to a 5-year-old, and the best as I could, all the different options for Crohn's disease. And after about an hour, I was like, what do you want me to do for you? Because you can't force a 5-year-old to drink chocolate milk. You can't do it. So he's like, well, I'll go ahead and drink the chocolate milk. And so after that, he was determined, and he did it. He even learned how to guzzle, like to drink it, because at first it took about an hour to drink 8 ounces. So I taught him how to guzzle that. He learned how to do that, and in about 10 seconds he could drink 8 ounces. And so we did it for about 12 weeks, and he made it through, and we did the vitamin D, and then afterwards we kept him on 8 ounces a day, even now. And so he went down and got another colonoscopy, and it was completely clean, completely normal. And it shocked his Crohn's specialist, pediatric Crohn's specialist, said, that's absolutely shocking. This never happened before. He decided to start other kids on the same deal, and they did well. And there's a Japanese study out a couple of years, actually this last year, a Japanese study came out, and all those kids are doing well. And I get calls from people all over the world now about childhood Crohn's disease and how to work with their children. And so miracles are different. You need to leave it in God's hands on how he's going to answer your prayer. It's not like he doesn't answer your prayer, but you just don't know how best to answer your prayer. If he had instantly healed Wesley when we anointed him, then yeah, it would help Wesley. Wesley would be fine, but what about all these other kids? Right? So this was, in my mind, looking back on it, it was a better miracle, learning how to work with Crohn's disease rather than have an instant cure. And so it's better just to leave things in God's hands. You can always pray and ask God for things, but when it comes right down to it, you need to end your prayer with, I want your will to be done here. Take me where I need to be. Prophecy is even better as far as a design is concerned for the Bible, but we don't have time for that today. That's a whole other topic. So just in closing, I'd just like to close with a butterfly illustration. A caterpillar is very happy as a caterpillar. It likes being a worm. It's happy eating leaves and growing fat and being chubby and crawling along, doing its thing. And but one day, there's these cells inside the caterpillar that are called imaginal cells, and they start growing and taking over the caterpillar. And the caterpillar doesn't like this, and he mounts an immune response against these cells. But the immune response fails, and the cells continue to take over the caterpillar's body, and it turns the caterpillar into sludge, completely wipes out the caterpillar, destroys it. And then it uses the sludge, the goo of the caterpillar that used to be a caterpillar, and it makes butterfly parts out of that goo. And they grow and grow and grow until out of the cocoon, or the chrysalis, comes a butterfly. And this is a really neat process. There's a spinneret on the caterpillar, and it makes this cocoon or chrysalis around itself, which is magnificent, because if you don't do it properly and you have a little hole in your cocoon or whatever, all your goo will leak out. And that's it for you, right? And then you also have crochet hooks there to hang on the little silk pad that you made. They're really cool. If you don't have those done properly, you fall off and die. And so those are pretty cool. Also, the color of the butterfly, once it's made, this butterfly isn't blue, it's just gray. But you see it as blue because these tiny little things that are made out of chitin, which is a type of sugar molecule that doesn't have any color to it, they form these structures called gyroids that are kind of crystalline type structures, and they reflect light in different colors and give the butterfly its metallic look. And these gyroids have to be precisely formed in order to reflect the different colors of light. Otherwise, it's just gray. Doesn't make any color at all. And there's all kinds of different gyroids for different colors, and they're really cool by themselves. So, again, you might like being a worm, but God has a better plan for you, and God happens to like worms. And if you don't believe that God kind of thinks of us like that, read Isaiah. He says, "Don't be afraid, O worm Jacob, O little Israel, for I myself will help you, declares the Lord. Your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel." And so, because, hey, it's kind of hard to think of yourself as a worm, but all of us are kind of wormy, if you want to be honest about it. And one of the biggest worms in the Bible was David. Again, I talked to you about him. But David said, yeah, God, I've done some pretty wormy things, and I need help. And he says, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." And then God said to David, "Okay, I'll do that for you. I'll remove your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh." And that miracle of removing our hearts of stone and giving us a reasonable heart where we can actually love each other, a heart of flesh, that's a huge miracle. It's more miraculous than the universe, than living things. It's the greatest miracle performed by divine power, according to Ellen White and evangelism. Because what did it cost God to do this miracle for David and for us? Everything, right? He had to empty heaven to do it. He had to give himself, and Christ couldn't see through the portals of the tomb. He thought that that would be it for him. And so he was willing to give himself for me and for you in order to produce this miracle and give us a new heart. And so I just think that what we've been given as Christians, the evidence we've given, not only that God exists, but that God cares about us personally, individually, and that God has offered us hope and a future, this is something that we just can't turn down. So if anybody is in Christ, he's a new creation. You're no longer your wormy self anymore, and you can be a new creation right now. If you accept God into your life, he'll give you this miracle of a new birth right now, so that the old will be gone and the new will come. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this, the grace you've given to each one of us, this hope and a future that you've provided for us. Not only knowledge of your existence, but knowledge of your personal care and love for us, that you came and died for us on the cross, for each one of us, in order for us to be able to have hope and a future, a bright future, where we don't have fires that destroy houses and kill lives, and that we don't have Crohn's disease or anything else that causes us pain and suffering, that this world will be no more, that we can grow up and become something beautiful, no longer our wormy selves anymore, but we can realize this taste of heaven right now if we have ask you into our lives. Please give us this miracle today.